Well, welcome, folks. Carrie, James, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be talking about all things about branding and the importance of brand. I'd love to start it off by just giving you a chance to succinctly give the background of yourselves so that we can provide context and then kick off the discussion. So Carrie, I'd love to start with you.
Thanks, Danny. Really good to be here. My name is Carrie Pollard, as mentioned. I'm currently the Chief Revenue Officer at Patreon, which in essence means much of the funnel. So PR, marketing, creator acquisition, onboarding, as well as creator success. Most of my career actually was spent in retail and e-commerce. I think it's been fascinating over the last year or so, seeing so many creators actually become businesses themselves. So I'm actually finding some of the conversations that I used to have with major retailers about their customer base is now really transcending to talking to creators about their audiences. So much fragmentation, online, offline. But yeah, I'm currently based in LA. I've again been with Patreon for the last year and a half.
Super, thank you. And Mr. Vincent?
Also equally honored to be here chatting with two of my favorite people. So I run a company called Founder, but it's FNDR because we couldn't afford the vowels. So that's my little gag. Some big Chinese company already had that website. So we're FNDR, we work for founders. And I just have been lucky enough to be right next to a bunch of pretty big founders. So I worked with Steve Jobs for 11 years and met him every week and ran the agency for him, and then worked with Brian Chesky for 3 years and worked at Airbnb and Evan at Snapchat and yada, yada, yada. Anyway, and now there's four amazing, four partners at Founder, and we just work with really great founders. And we appreciate the many great introductions, Danny, that you've given us. We look for founders with intention, and we're very excited to have this opportunity to talk to more founders through this moment. So
super. Well, thank you very much. It's funny, I was just getting off a call with one of my companies called Otrium, and we were just chatting about one of the founders, Milan, was asking me, we're looking for someone to head up brand for the company, and Milan was asking me, so what should we be looking for? And, can you think of any e-commerce companies, or can you think of tech companies that really you think are excellent at branding? And, my point repeatedly, and Carrie, you know this, is that, I feel like our industry has more seen brand as a byproduct of having a great service rather than proactively thinking about what it means to build a brand. And so, when you think of companies like Google or Facebook or Pinterest, these brands, or Dropbox, these brands are byproducts of having a very valuable product that people use, service that people use. So I was really excited when Carrie asked me, I've decided to focus on brand for Patreon, who would you introduce me to? And so Carrie, I wanted to start off with you and just find out, what made you conclude that it was time for Patreon to think about branding in a proactive manner? What was the impetus for that?
Such a good question. And it's been just such a ride with James and the founder team. And we're actually continuing that ride for at least the next 6 months, if not longer, which I'm looking forward to.
Stuck with
Patreon, yes, thankfully so. We had this incredible story to start, which I think is a bit unique in terms of some companies, and which is really Jack's story, right? And that story continues to resonate even 8 years later. So I think we've been really lucky to have this amazing, not only story, but face and voice behind that story. And why he started Patreon, again, continues to ring true today, which is to say, hey, I'm an artist, I'm a creator. I've been that way since I graduated from college, and I'm making, incredible content. I'm getting millions of views. And at the end of the day on YouTube or the like, I open my earnings dashboard and I get $166. there is a community here. I'm getting millions of views. They respond when I ask them to do things. The loyalty is just unmatched. But yet, when I open those earning dashboards, the money is so little. Like, the system is broken. There is something wrong here. There has to be a better way. And again, that story still resonates today. I think a lot of creators, for example, really struggle with the fact that, okay, I know people like me. I know they love what I do, but yet the algorithms, the ads, the beast doesn't necessarily represent that. So I think we've been really lucky to have this like continuous story, which again, not all tech companies have. And that's a story that we continue to lean into. But in addition to that, we have 250,000 creators on the platform as well that are not just doing podcasts, they're not just doing video, they're doing like things like 3D printing and building communities around that. There's sailing communities on the platform as well. And so when you have 250,000 people talking about Patreon to their communities, they're all talking about it in very different ways based on what they do and based on their audiences. So I think that's been kind of the challenge to a certain extent, where we've organically kind of rode that virality for many, many years. And it's like, okay, do we stand in the background as a brand, or do we try to provide that air cover to a certain extent? But how do we take more control of the narrative? And I think at the end of the day, in working with Founder, what we found is that we can still, creators should be that primary voice for the platform. And Jack and that story should continue, absolutely. But how do we complement that? And I think at the end of the day, yes, it's membership. Yes, we're facilitating payments, but at the end of the day, it is about that content and community. And so taking ownership of something that everybody is doing on the platform and being much louder and prouder about that particular aspect. And how do we bring that to life? So it's not just about getting creators paid, but it's actually allowing them to connect directly with their audiences, open their earnings dashboard, and actually see the value for the work that they're creating. So that was really, you know, having all the Jack story and all the different creators, and where do we actually sit in that ecosystem in terms of our particular brand. And I think, again, working with Founder and kind of finding what is so central to all of our creators and us in pushing that forward, and the potential in terms of what we can do with that is super exciting.
Super. And James and Carrie, I wasn't able to talk about what Patreon is doing on a branding standpoint because it hasn't sort of launched in a massive way yet. So I'll hold off from that. But the two companies that I did mention to the Otrium founders were Airbnb and Apple, as two companies that I sort of feel proactively thought about branding, not as a byproduct of a great service, but really were strategic about it. And James, obviously you've been involved in both, but you know, we need to have a few Steve Jobs stories, for God's sake. So, you know, I guess the question that I would have is, how much was that brand focus driven by Steve Jobs understanding the importance of it versus someone on the team, you know, coming to Steve and saying, hey, we really have to do something with this company. We really have to stand for something.
Well, let me start by, I will get to some Steve and Brian illustrations of the point I want to make, which is, I mean, I don't think brand is like a thing over there. It is you. It's a question of whether you decide to live it or not, right? And I think there is work to be done to clarify what that intentional story is that you want to put out in the world, what your vision is, and what your voice to that vision is. So there's work to be done that if you don't do, you sort of fumble around and you don't become clear. But a brand is a story, not a series of stories that are disconnected, but one story. So if I was to use Steve as the first example of that, I mean, I think the greatest example, I think one of the reasons why we all have I have no question that you all have Apple products is his strong stance on privacy that was so early and so sort of odd and out of context at the time, but he was so clear on it. And of course, you know, the last 20 years has been the history that it has been, which is that, you know, privacy is incredibly, you know, an issue in people's minds, let's say, and certain brands that haven't been as intentional as they could have been. And I think Steve's view always was that it's a product-driven company, okay? So let's not pull product and brand apart. Let's not do that. Apple is a product-driven company. I mean, the most product-driven company, right? Every keynote, product marketing runs that place, right? And so everything is thought about from a product point of view, but every time a product comes up, a question that Steve would ask is, what's the brand deposit of that product? What's the brand deposit, right? It's a great product, but no, we'll be doing another one next year, another one. But what's the, Retina display? That was a brand deposit. Facebook, FaceTime, that was a brand deposit. The new chip, that's a brand deposit. Slowly but surely, you're building all of these horizontal capabilities, right? Which we now know to be a $2 trillion company because they spent 20 years every single year bringing in things that just basically became the new bar for everything. And so I don't like to think of brand and product as separate. I think that you have to, but they do get separated, and that's why you need to be clear about brand. And so founders like Steve make product marketing stick with and understand that good strategy, and I'll give you a good Steve quote, good strategy is 1,000 no's for every yes. Now, 1,000 is a lot. So we could do 100 if you like, but it's that kind of jeopardy that he likes to introduce to people. But a lot of no's means really clear about the yeses. He'd say, like, write a list of 10 things you want to do, and if you don't get halfway through the year, strike from 6 to 10 out and do the top 5 best. And if you can't do that, do the top 3 best. But do a few things really, really well, and be known for them, and make sure that they're brand deposits. So. And then my experience with Brian was actually product is marketing and marketing is product. So I went into Airbnb and worked with him to build the experiences product, which was magical trips for a little bit. And so I spent a couple of days a week up in San Francisco at Airbnb and had a couple of breakfasts with you, Danny, as I remember. And we sort of created a minimum viable product. And then, but Brian's whole thing was, how do we build a product that speaks to what we believe in? And I think Airbnb is an unbelievably intentional company. Again, I'm going to keep using that word intentional. That's what a brand is. You can make a million choices, but if you follow the algorithm or you just follow what's working and you don't have your own compass, you're not a brand. You're a series of, accumulated decisions, right? You are the accumulation of all the decisions you make. That's a brand. And so I like to think they're both very intentional founders. Airbnb has gone on to prove, even when they laid off some people a year ago, his note that he wrote was like, I mean, that's worth reading. It's really, it's a testament to the effort and the energy that Brian puts, how much he cares about the hosts, how much he cares about his internal culture. The S1 is like it's like a thesis on how to write an S1, beautifully crafted. He brought like Johnny Ive from Apple as a consultant. He brought, some of the finest writers to think about how do we articulate this thing so people understand it. $100 billion, IPO later, here we are. And I think it's the only brand in travel, really, or really one of the few, right? I don't think, I must rush to bookings.com to order something, right? I just go online and they've got the search engine throws me in there. That's fine. But I don't think about bookings.com. I think about Airbnb, because it's a brand. So,
super. Thank you. Carrie, so can you tell us a bit about like what you came up with as the brand campaign for Patreon, what you folks with James's team came up with, and how you got to that decision?
Oh, yeah, it was great. I mean, the way that Founder works, which I really appreciate, and I think is very different than a lot of different agencies where, when they say founder, it's really just really working with the founders. So having Jack and Sam as our 2 co-founders and just myself and Julian, who's our new chief product officer, in those sessions, allowing us to really go deep and having that institutional knowledge along with kind of the future vision for product and marketing together in terms of what that needed to look like. It just allows you to kind of discuss at a clip and be at a level that you just move with such just great efficiency versus, I've been through other exercises where it's like interviewing. And again, I think a lot of that stuff has been done previously, and having the co-founders in the room and having a lot of that background knowledge and bringing that to the table, I think is just super, super efficient. I think where we were to, in terms of the repositioning, where we entered that room, and I mentioned it a little bit in my last answer, is that, we've been known as a membership platform, and underlying that is then a platform to get creators paid. And so immediately people think about payments. And when you look at the acceleration of the creator economy over the past year, which has been insane, everybody is trying to help creators get paid, even though we've been doing this for the last 8 years. Since 2013, we've been focused on this. But because it's been membership and going back to the no ads, the no algorithm, and the creator having a direct connection with the fan, it's really been about these incredible communities across 250,000 creators and 8 million fans that have erupted on the platform that we weren't necessarily capturing, that we weren't necessarily showcasing. The fact that we let creators actually own their audience. They have the contact information of every single one of their fans. And that's exactly what we've seen on Patreon for years, is that these creators are bringing like-minded people together. They then get to know one another, both online and offline. And this incredible connection and relationship, that VIP velvet rope experience, it's not happening on mass media platforms. So we went really deep with Founder in terms of just like the evolution of the first Renaissance, the second Renaissance, and what was working and what was not working, and kind of the infinite scroll culture we talked a lot about, which is not what we want to be. And I think when I think about brand, and I even think about my own kind of patterns, and it's like we're all looking to feel something. And so oftentimes when we're doing the infinite scroll, whether it's on Instagram or the like, it's like we're looking just to like feel something. And we want to create Patreon as a place that, hey, you're following people that you love and what they make. And anytime that you go, open the mobile app and engage in the community or engage with the creator, you're going to feel something. Because to James's point, it's been intentional. I joined this community. Nobody's dictating what I do and do not see and who I engage with. I am very intentional in terms of that purpose. So that's been kind of the evolution in terms of why we chose to engage Founder, and now actually bringing that to life, which is where the execution and the tactics come in terms of language and visual identity across all of our touch points, both from a product as well as a marketing standpoint.
Patreon are the original gangsters. You guys are the OG people, and then suddenly everyone else pitched up and went, oh yeah, that's right. Let's, creators, need to make money. I think the opportunity, if you think of all of these platforms that force creators to operate in certain ways, right? And I think there's a freedom and a liberation and an opportunity that will be felt by consumers as they go on and feel that actually creators are being creative in their own expressive way. It's like the tight boundaries within which the platform rigor of being on YouTube, I need to go like this. Being on Instagram, I need to be like this. Being on, I don't know, Clubhouse, on Twitter, I have to behave in these certain ways. And I think there's a liberation on Patreon. And I think that creates a bond, because there's a truthfulness to the relationship between the artist and the fan. And having the fans see that they get really, really unique and authentic connection with the people that they love is going to happen there. It's not going to happen on a platform that sort of forces a certain set of behaviors that aren't necessarily ones that they want to express. So I thought that was also a big part of it. Sorry, Dan, I interrupted you.
No, I was going to say, what's also interesting, and Carrie, you mentioned this, Jack is such a phenomenal storyteller, right? And there are TED Talks and there are all these YouTube videos that he's been doing for years on explaining the Patreon story. And you could assume from that, well, do we really need to do this brand work? Fundamentally, we have a founder who is so good at spreading the gospel. Like, do we really need to double down on brand? And so, James, my question for you is, do all companies need to focus on brand? And are there certain stages where it makes more sense to focus on brand than others? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so back to the brand is sort of everything. It's the story and its intentionality, right? So that I would argue, but so I'm going to use the larger version. But I think your question is actually focusing on making sure that that's clearly understood and communicated and lived through, right? And so, look, I think that's a job that you do
Thanks,
every single
James.
day in your
You're even
product.
making my question better. You're encapsulating my question. I mean, I'm the host. You
This
could
is a
have a
founder
little.
session, Danny. This is a
My
founder
God.
session. You're in it, man. You're in it. You're in
I'm
it.
in it.
So a lot of founders come with one of my favorite charts that we do is what got you here won't get you there. And it's like, it's the sort of development and then a big gap and then the sort of your future. And then a lot of companies come to us at that sort of defining moment, right? So it's that moment like, oh my God, I just got $100 million from Danny Reimer. What the fuck do I do? I'm kidding, but you know what I mean? Like they're at a moment where they go, growth. Okay, now, and then they turn around and they look at the work they've done and they're like, well, it's 3 years old. They dust it off and they go, well, we're not really that anymore. And the logo looks like we're 12. And so, wait a second, what the heck? Like, how do, And so I define that simply as the business is ahead of the brand. And I think often technology, a lot of, very keen VCs, a lot of money going around. So they grow and they revenue drive and they do performance marketing and they get, they build product and right. And suddenly they're kind of like almost out beyond the cliff, like how the coyote sort of like, like out here, and they're like, oh shit, we've got a business, but no brand. And so often we're kind of like, okay, sort of push the ladder out and then they sort of, anyway, or whatever, I'll forget the metaphor, but you get the point, which is bringing the brand and the expression of the brand so clearly, because of course businesses change and evolve, right? And they have to. I mean, Kerry's a living example of where she spent most of her career and where she is today. That is a living example of categories merging and new trends. And so I would say that if everyone that's working for you isn't clear about where you're going and how you're getting there, if you're not able to succinctly, we have this little device called a story on a page, which I sometimes send to founders when they go, why do I need you? I'm like, I don't know, I'll send you this story on a page, see if you can fill it in. And it has a whole bunch of stuff like how are you relevant to culture? Like, what are you trying to do? Tell me your pitch in 30 seconds. Like, what's your living system? Like, what's your social contract with consumers and with your partners? And, and obviously like the next week, people are like, can you help us with that? Like it's good, but I think we could do it a little bit better. And some of it, and one of the nice things is actually how they feel it. I like hearing how they do it. So I'm like, that's awesome. I think what you're saying is this. Let's find a really, there's an up level version of that. So I think it's at inflection moments, particularly because founders are busy people. They have a lot to do. They wouldn't have a business if they didn't focus on growth and on revenue driving and all of those good things. But at some point, the cycle of growth gets sort of ahead of them, and then we're often the sort of SWAT team that comes in on a helicopter and comes down on ropes for 6 weeks and sort of bashes everyone around a little bit and gets the story clear. But we're always threading it backwards or from the beginning. Like our first question is always like, tell us your foundings. What's your origin? We're like, why are you doing what you're doing? Like, we're not lipstick on the pig of anything. And we're also not trying to sell you anything. We're actually listening, up leveling. What about this? What about that? What about this? Like constant ideation. And here's another idea. And to be honest, that was a trick that kind of got me through 11 years of working with Steve, right? So I'll give you another very quick Steve story. So my job was every Wednesday from 1 till 3 was to present all of the marketing ideas across every product. And of course, I had a whole agency of 300 people behind me, so that was good. But it also meant that I was sort of sitting there, and he'd sit down and go, "All right, James, what do you got today?" And he'd say one conversation, so I'd be like, "Okay, last week we liked this, we didn't like that, we needed 3 of those. You like this, so what we brought back today is a bunch of ideas around this area, but what we've done is split it into 3 new areas because we really think the idea is here and here and here." And he's like, starts walking around the room. The whole room's full of creative ideas. The whole boardroom at Apple, which is pretty big. Well, actually, sorry, the old boardroom, not the new. I have no idea how big the new boardroom is because anyway, whatever. So, and then you go, oh, this is interesting. No, I don't. Yeah, wait. Oh, what's this? Oh, yeah, no, that's not interesting. And so it's this notion that if we bring lots of ideas, both creatively and strategically, to smart people, they will be able to go, oh, that's interesting. No, that's not. Oh, I'd never thought of it that way. Let me sleep on that. So constant iteration, constant ideation, bringing you loads of ideas and not trying to sell you one. You need to be attracted to it. And that's why founders saying nice things about us, because we're never trying to sell you anything. We're just showing you stuff and seeing what what's heat attractive to you. So I have no idea whether I answered your question.
No, that was great. I mean, it actually points to a few things that I highlight with the entrepreneurs that I work with. I mean, James, as you know, I'm definitely one who pounds the table on the importance of brand, and Carrie, you've witnessed that. And I actually think that, to your point, building the business ahead of the brand, I'm certainly of the voice in the boardroom, often sort of saying we need to focus on brand early on and really understand it and continue to improve it. And oftentimes that sort of falls on deaf ears because folks don't think that we're ready yet, or we can afford it, or it's not the right focus, the business is not big enough. But then the other aspect that happens is once the work has been done, it's sort of like, well, we've done it, we checked the box, we've hit that sweet spot, we know where we are, we don't need it anymore. It's sort of like, if you look at the meditation apps, people use meditation when they're in crisis, but as soon as they actually have gone through that crisis, they stop meditating. So they stop subscribing. And so you see the cohorts of those meditation apps, and as soon as people feel good about themselves, they stop. And I feel like a lot of companies think about brand in that approach. And what I love about your your anecdote about Steve is that, you went every Wednesday for 11 years to see Steve. And it's not like Apple necessarily needed to sort out its brand story. It's just this constant desire of improving it and making it part of the quotidien, of the quotidian, the day-to-day of the company, which I find should be that should be the North Star for companies of all types. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And I remember, James, that at one point I asked you, why did Apple come up with so much incredible marketing assets and messages and campaigns? And you're like, look, any CEO who is that dedicated over decades to this process is going to come up with phenomenal, mind-blowing campaigns. Mm-hmm. So I think it's worth the work. I did want to talk a bit about social media and how you think about social media in terms of brand and in terms of conveying the message out there. Carrie, I'd love to start with you, because what you were saying, obviously social media is a current, but also your creators, those 250,000 creators, are social media phenomena in of themselves and are brands in of themselves. So it's actually quite complicated when thinking about Patreon. So I'd love to get your view on it.
Yeah, absolutely. We've definitely leaned in terms of, the creators speaking on behalf of Patreon and their memberships and using social to be able to effectively do so kind of based on their communities. We too, I think, again, Patreon as a brand leveraging social media, I think just brands in general, and I know you're going to ask this too, in terms of breaking through as a brand in today's environment is really hard. Having done a ton of interviews, we too are looking for a new VP of marketing focused on brand. It's like talking to all these different companies and like what it takes now to effectively break through, and literally having to go to the extreme. I think our former president played that really, really well, and he broke through because of it. And it's a little bit overwhelming and daunting in terms of, okay, do I just need to say like crazy shit to be able to get some virality and awareness on social? And that's, I think, what a lot of brands feel like. And does that make sense for our brand personality to do so. And so we've definitely more leaned towards, working with our creators. We have a creator ambassador program as well. And at the end of the day, we do want it to be organic and authentic. And, because of the success that they're seeing with their communities and on the platform, to be able to kind of shout from the rooftops to a certain extent. But from a brand perspective, whether it's on YouTube or Instagram or Twitter or the like, it's really challenging. I've, even go back to last year and George Floyd. I mean, I was just in awe of Ben and Jerry's. I mean, just in terms of how they broke through on social media. But at the same time, that was always been part of their DNA in terms of, systemic racism and social injustice. And so to be able to just talk in such an incredible intellectual and educational way and so prolific, that wasn't new for them. They didn't just wake up when the events went down and say, hey, we're going to draft. This was the part of who they were. And so I think for us, it's like we're this incredible platform that can showcase a diversity of different types of creators and messages. And so that's been kind of our gift, is how do we raise those voices, whether it's on platform or off platform. And again, making that connection ultimately back to Patreon. But it is definitely more of a creator first approach.
James, what are your views on how social media affects brand building or brand integrity?
Yeah, it's a huge question. I mean, look, firstly, social media is popular culture. Okay, so it's not over there. It just is. It is popular culture. It's not like the digital version of the popular culture. It is popular culture, right? So there is no option that exists where you're not utilizing social media, right? But the challenge, of course, is that, the attention economy and driving those like constant scroll that Kerry was describing before, and the desperate feeding of TikToking or dancing or whatever, right, can drive you to behave in a non-intentional way. Of course, I'm going to use that word again, aren't I? And so, I think some of Kerry's examples are really good ones, which is you look for brand deposits in an environment that, right? So you find collaborators or you find creators and you go deep with them. I would honestly, from a simple brand view, and I think this may or may not be a Steveism, but I'll say it anyway. I would rather have 1,000 people that love me than 1 million people that like me. Because a like is a fleeting, it's really fleeting, right? But a love is right? I'm not talking about a clicking, but I'm talking about, no, I'm really into Patreon, right? And that's something to build on versus the sort of transitory, I'm here and I'm gone. And so I think you do things that provide a brand deposit, that are intentional, that fit with your story. Ben and Jerry's, REI, Nike, all these companies, Airbnb, they do things very intentionally. I think just the challenge, we work closely with Evan at Snap to try to, at that critical moment around 2018, when he introduced the new app and he pushed the influencers out. I'm sure you remember that moment, right? And the stock crashed and everybody was like, what the heck? How can that guy be driving that big company? Well, turns out he's doing rather well because he's the voice of a generation and he understands. And he also, I think, was incredibly intentional in terms of saying, influencers are not your friends. Don't put them in your friend channel. Don't get confused by influence. Oh, look, Kanye's in my friend channel. It's like, no, he's not in your friend channel, all right? This notion of, back then, if I was to retrace that conversation that Snap did, right? Versus say, because what we did with them was work on, ephemerality. But so the Snap's not, wow, it's ephemeral, like that must be really bad. It's like, well, no, actually, because it increases realness and it's just your friends. That's pretty good, right? Rather than lying to strangers, which is what you do on some other, right? I'm lying because I didn't have a good day. I just posted a beautiful picture of my family and we're kind of getting divorced, but shh, right? And I've got 10,000 friends. Well, you certainly don't, so they're strangers, right? Whereas on Snap, we've got like 15 people, and they're real and they're friends and you'd behave in a real manner. And so we came up with a campaign with them. They came up with the campaign. We just directed them. called Real Friends, and then since then everybody's like, oh, I understand what Snap is now. That's a brand, right? And I think before, and I don't want to create too much credit because Evan is the voice of a generation, and he was creating that ephemeral thing. He just absolutely, we just helped him bring it to life. We helped him articulate, we helped him make it clear that they're a little bit different than other social media. So anyway, back to brands and social media. I think don't be pulled along by what the platform makes you do. Have a very clear sense of self and do what you believe is the right thing intentionally for yourself. And those things will pop up. Those things will actually be the pop-ups. They'll be remembered, not for the day, but maybe for longer. And that makes a brand deposit.
Cool. Carrie, obviously, it's been a delight working with the Patreon team and working with Jack and Sam since pretty much the beginning from the Series A. But I would say that, you were the person on the team who came and sort of rang the alarm bell of having to focus on brand. And so there are two questions that I have for this, because I think I'm curious as to how you did it, because I tried and I failed. But second of all, what sort of budget do you think you need? Like, is there a budget discussion that comes along the brand discussion, or actually are they separate discussions? Can you walk us through how you strategically got to this point?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, we're also very lucky in that, Jack does really care about brand, and I think has from the very beginning. But again, he's also CEO and doing a zillion different things. So I think just investing in my position and having somebody to be able to focus on it and help bring it to life. So it's definitely been part of, go ahead.
Gary, sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but I that's why I wanted to highlight, Jack is so good at brand. Correct. And is so good at telling the story, as Jane was talking about, that it almost felt like, well, do we really need to focus on this? For God's sakes, we have such a talented founder of the company who's so good at storytelling and is so consistent about it. I think that's part of the reason why you're right. He absolutely cares about it immensely, but he's sort of, it's inherent to who he is. And so the question is, that's different from getting him to commit to a process, a project, a budget. So that's what I'm trying to get to. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And he also believes in scale too, and that scale being beyond himself. I think there's also, another trend that's been going on here now for the last couple of years is that there's also just a lot of skepticism, as you know, around big tech. And being a technology platform, unfortunately, we sometimes get lumped into the decisions made by other platforms that aren't necessarily creator first. So Jack, at the end of the day, he's not only a creator, he is a CEO of a tech company. And so I want him to continue. And he knows, the Anthony Bourdain of the creative economy, traveling the world, that is my dream in a post-pandemic world. That I just bringing all these incredible stories to life from all over the world. That is my dream as we move into 2022, and hopefully we'll be able to get him there. So that is absolutely going to continue. And people can see that he is truly creator first. When we have one-to-one phone calls with even some of the biggest household names and seeing that kind of creator to creator connection, you get me, you understand what I need, you're not going to screw me or my particular audience. How do we scale that? And so we have that kind of aspect and some of the skepticism around just CEOs in general in terms of tech companies. So it's important that we have other voices. And again, for Patreon, it's also giving the content and community story to our creators as well, right? And so they are the 250,000 in addition to Jack. If Jack's saying one thing and the community is feeling and saying something else, that's not super helpful. And so as we kind of jump the curve and really lean into content and community, that it's not just about getting paid, it's about also working with these creators and then also bringing some of those big names on the platform as well to kind of accelerate that message too, which we've seen obviously a lot of other brands do as well, whether it be Nike, but then also talking about if you have a body, you're an athlete. Like, I think that's a really interesting approach, and definitely a playbook that, we're looking to leverage more and more, is to be able to say, hey, yes, there is creators of all sizes on the platform, but if you have a brain, you can be a creator. I mean, there's just that emphasis. So yeah, I think there's just been trends in the system that definitely we'd like, okay, let's invest in this position. Let's have this focus. Let's have somebody actually bring this to life and really, work with everybody and internally to do so. But I'm super lucky in that he's been super, super supportive every step of the way. And from a budgeting perspective, going back to what James said.
So my takeaway from what you just said is basically you made it sound like his idea. So I got that. Okay, now let's get to the budget.
Yes, the budget. I mean, I think it's all intertwined. It's not separate. It really is. And I think, with having a new chief product officer on board, Julian, working with him in terms of, okay, what does the product transformation look like? How does actually the product support the brand promise and vice versa? So actually going through that together and budgeting together. And then also a big part of the brand, as I just mentioned, is also getting more creators on board as well. So it's all intertwined. So it's not just like, oh, this is just about brand. It's like, no, getting more creators, talking about content and community, speaking from a product marketing perspective to some of the new features around content and community. It all works together. So there's not hard and fast lines in terms of how much I can spend versus the rest. And again, the entire executive team at this point is like, is that enough? Which, I never thought. Do we need to go bigger? Do we need to do more? Which is a beautiful place to be. So yes, we did. And Danny, going back, it's like every board meeting, looking at Danny and his excitement around brand and marketing has just been, you've also been critical in terms of some of these decisions and making this introduction here too. So I want to thank you as well.
Oh, thanks, Carrie. But did you, just because I do think that there's some practical value to this, like when you pitched the concept, did you say, folks, if we're going to do this, we have to do it correctly. We have to find a partner. And I just want to give you a heads up that we have to commit X amount of time and X amount of dollars and buy-in for this? Or was it not that sort of specific?
Again, very lucky to have somebody like Jack that understands the work required, which again, I recognize that not all marketers are lucky. In that regard, I'm very lucky. So to have him as a partner, to be able to really bring it to life, to be able to look across the entire company. And again, even other members of core exec recognizing how important this was, and kind of going back to James's graph of like, hey, we all recognize that what got us to here is not going to get us to there. And we need to move fast, and we got to lock arms, and we got to move together and make sure that we're all aligned across the entire business. And so we all recognized in terms of the importance of that work, but again, very lucky in terms of the support at the executive level.
Danny, if I can just jump in, Jack's amazing, as is Sam, as is Julian. I mean, we love the Patreon guys, but and there's no but there are founders that don't have that much natural proclivity for storytelling. Let me just say that. We work with them all the time, and actually, that might take a minute longer to get engaged, but I actually think one of the things that a company like ours could bring is perspective and context for a story you've been telling each other for 3 years, 5 years, whatever, and you need someone to like pull the genius out of the founder. I say that a lot. I'm like, I'm going to pull the genius out of you, and and they go, that's a great story, but it took you like 10 minutes, and I kind of understood it, but like, let's get that down to 30 seconds. Let's figure out what are the words that you're using that you'll just keep using. Like if Brian Chesky told me the freaking founder story one more time, I was going to like punch him in the face. Cause there was a design conference and some people came over and they slept on the couch and then we gave them breakfast and Airbnb. I was like, Jesus Christ, again? No, anyway, just right. And some people are just naturally gifted at that storytelling thing and they just do it down pat. And some people are, are not. But it doesn't prevent, Kerry's fortunate, but there are other situations where founders equally need that story. And so I would argue that is when a third party helps a lot, right? Because we can push and cajole and motivate and stimulate and challenge and provoke to pull them in. And I think that's critical, because sometimes the internal dynamic means it might not happen.
Got it. In terms of stage and budget, what would you say?
It depends on the type of business. So I don't want to be too like, oh, like some are rocket ships and some are like, this is going to take a while. And, like biotech takes a long, long time. Or, we've got people growing leather and it's going to take a while, right? And people growing mycelium under the ground, and that's going to take a while, right? And anyway, and then there's other things like, oh my God, this is a rocket ship. We launched So Rare in January. They talked to us in December. They were like, we're launching in 4 weeks. We need help. It's crypto-backed assets, for like playing cards, which are soccer, right? And we came up with Own the Game and and we worked with Nicholas, and it was great. The speed. So I sound like I'm dodging your question. Look, it's gonna take a few $100,000 and 15 hours of all your founders' time. That might be worth more than $300,000, right? So be ready, like spend 15 hours and 300 I'll just put a number on it, just to figure out what the story is. And then after that, you go, okay, now how are we going to pull this together? We need to redesign the brand. Okay, we need to do design. We need a go-to-market strategy. Okay, we need to figure that out. We need to go deep on product. Okay, that's another process. And that's some of the things that we're now doing with Patreon. So it's the foundational work that I was describing, which is, now, if you've already got the foundational work and you're just looking to express it, that's another set of conversations. But what we try to do is get in early enough in that moment, of that inflection moment, as Gladwell will say, that sort of like, oh my God, I can see the hill up ahead of me, but I just don't have the tools. But I got the spirit and I'm ready to go. And if someone could just drag it out of me and find out what it is, then let's go. So I think figure out when your inflection moment is, and then bring some really good storytellers and brand thinkers in to stimulate your team even, because I think those offsites, after the 10th offsite and you haven't cracked it and you start looking at each other and like, whose job is this? I think sometimes some external stimulation, Danny, as you do often with your founders, helps a lot. And I know you do that every day. So
yeah, cool. I mean, just to echo James' point, is that even as much support as I felt that I had, having founder come in and having those set meetings, and then just the instant trust and credibility with that we had with the founder team allowed us to move fast, which again, I think if it was just internal only, there's still competing priorities and time, and hey, we got to make time, and it's just all this wrangling, but just having that buy-in and having the third party and that particular support allowed us just to move so much faster than I think we would have moved internally. It would have taken probably 2, 3, 4 times. So again, it pays for itself to a certain extent. There's still now a lot of work to do, but in terms of those sessions, so much, I think the most efficient process that I've ever experienced.
Super. Thanks. I think we should end this with your favorite recent, most memorable ad that you've seen. I'll tell you the one that comes to mind for me, which was actually the simplest one that I watched at the Super Bowl, which was the founder of Oatly. Did you see that one? Where he's playing, he's singing in a pasture, and it's the simplest ad I've seen in a very long time. So that's mine.
We worked with Tony and John last year, and we take no credit for that at all because they'd already come up with that. But they are that quirky and that. And yeah, I agree with you. It's just, I mean, oat milk's so boring, right? But it's not anymore. It's like Oatly, Who are those crazy Swedish people singing in a field? No, I love that one too.
Cool. Carrie, anyone that comes to mind? Doesn't have to be recent. It can be just one that's in your head whenever you think of just an amazing ad.
I got one if you need a minute.
Yeah, no, we're gonna attach these. By the way, we're gonna attach these at the end of the interview. So
okay,
pick wisely.
Yeah, go for it, James.
Just to buy you time if it helps. But we worked with the Beats team last summer during Black Lives Matter, and obviously we have some deep connections with Apple from yesteryear, and we knew a lot of the Beats team also. And their founders are both gone. right? So Dr. Dre, I mean, Beats by Dre, that was the cred, right? And Jimmy Iovine's no, slouch. And so those two people were gone, and Beats were, a little adrift. But I think it was clear from Apple that they really, really wanted Beats to be Beats. Like, what are you doing? Like, stop trying to be Apple, And so we spent some time, actually, it was very interesting because they already had a really great agency called Translation, which is Steve Stout and Chaucer, and it's just some fantastic, and it's an agency of color, like really, but I mean, unbelievably talented. And they came with their set of ideas. They were just coming on board, so it's great. So they weren't too entrenched. The Beats guys and so together we kind of wrote this brief, and obviously Translation take all the credit for bringing it to life. But that spot, which is you love black culture, but you love me, is unbelievable. It won an Emmy. It just won, it's probably spot of the year. And the timing of it, and it was just, we were just like, look, Beats is a genuine, you got to give voice to these people. That's what Black Lives Matter is. You're a brand that can do that. Like, stop trying to Appleify that. Apple want you to do that. And so it was just giving permission, I think. I mean, they were desperate to do it, and the guys at Beats were very excited and wanted the permission to do it. Again, all our role to do was to just sort of like give them the wording and the position and the permission for them to go create this incredible ad. So it's, you love black people, but you don't love me.
Fantastic.
Mine's probably a little bit lighter, going back to our levity piece. So I typically like ads that make me cry. There's no doubt, and there's definitely been plenty of them, especially over the past year. But the one, Progressive. And everybody knows Flow. It's not Flow, but their most recent campaign, probably over the last year or so, where the guy's actually trying to teach people not to be like their parents. Did they ask for your help right there? Did they ask? And so whether it's in the hardware, okay, why are you helping them back out their car? Did they ask for your help? That whole series, every time that commercial is on, I stop in my tracks and I have to watch, and I laugh every flipping time. I laugh how many ads these days actually make you laugh? There's plenty that make you cry, but actually how many make you laugh? And for me, that humor is just spot on. And again, especially over the past year, it's definitely always appreciated. But I actually look forward to seeing those commercials, which I don't think I've ever said in my entire life. But yeah, so that's kind of my favorite ad as of late.
Fantastic. Well, Carrie and James, thank you so much. What a fabulous way to spend an hour. I really appreciate it.
So fun.
It was a great conversation, and hope to see you both very soon. I don't know in the flesh, but certainly I'll see you on Zoom.
Some point.
Yes.
Can't wait.
Soon.
All right, guys.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Good to see
really
you.
fun.
Thank you. All right. Bye.
Bye, guys.